Okay, so yeah, the Israel thing is very interesting to me. Like the $5 billion of our tax dollars going to Israel, and I've been railing on this. I started railing on it yesterday because it doesn't make sense. They're not telling you why that money shouldn't go to Israel. They're being very vague. Think of it this way. Let's put Spock on the case. Because Spock is logical. Let's apply just pure logic. This get Spock on the case to this. Is first of all, okay, let's ask Spock from Star Trek. What do you think of this discourse in the public square about the $5 billion going to Israel? What do you think about this, Spock? Like do these people complaining about $5 billion going to Israel, do they have a legitimate grievance? Spock, why don't you answer that question? Do they have a legitimate reason to be grieved by this $5 billion going to Israel? What do you think, Spock? Well, Spock would say, well, yes, of course. It's only logical that people would be, yeah. Okay. Okay, Spock. Now for the next question. So you agree that there's a legitimate grievance to be had with this $5 billion going to Israel. So in this discourse among the public square on this grievance, do you hear any of them explaining why it's a grievance? Spock, can you tell us what it is that you're hearing, the reasoning behind that grievance? Why are they so grieved about it? And then, Spock is going to say, well, because obviously, that money should go to, address issues here in the U.S. Okay. Yeah. Well, there's so many though. So if we were to apply just pure logic, where as to what would be the best thing to do with that $5 billion, logically, what would it be, Spock? Well, logically, if we were to use logic as to where that money should go, that's a massive can of worms that nobody's ever talking about. That can is just perpetually kicked down. Nobody wants to even talk about where should that money go. So that's why we got to get Spock on the case, because Spock's the logical guy, right? He's the logical person. Logic. We need some real logic here, because I'm not seeing a lot of logic in this discussion about where that money should go. So to kind of expedite the process of deductive logic as far as where that money should go, let me ask Spock a question and just tap into Spock's logic. Spock, would you say that it would be more logical that money go to the people in the United States that are most in need of that money? Spock, does that sound logical to you? And Spock would have to admit that to some degree, there is a lot of logic in that kind of, assessment as to, if we're not going to send the money to Israel and it's $5 billion, and we're trying to figure out logically where that money should go, what would be the best use of that money, and we consider that one of the possible best uses is to get that money to those people in this country most in need. And so, of course, Spock would see the logic in that. And so even though there might be debate and argument to be had, he would have to admit that, yes, that would be the more logical thing, right? Okay, so now let's look at who are these people that would be most in need in this country, because we're using Spock logic now, right? We're not just going off of some internet influencer or some Holly weirdo or some career politician. we're just tapping into the logic of Spock, right? So fuck all these people. We're just going straight to Spock. Like, okay, logic, Spock. Give us the logic. If it is logical that that $5 billion should go, instead of to Israel, to those most in need of that money, and Spock agrees that that is one possible, more logical, conclusion. Okay, well then who would these people that are most in need of financial, who would these people be logically? Spock, can you give us some of your logical, your deductive logical insight on this? Who would these people that are most in need of that money be? Spock, would you, if let's say I were to say that the middle class are claiming they're the ones most in need, would you find that a logical conclusion, Spock? Of course, Spock would have to disagree that no, based off of logic and deductive logic, it would not be that the middle class are those most in need of money. It wouldn't be the middle class. No. Interesting, Spock. So if it's not the middle class, maybe it would be the upper middle class. Spock, what would you say about that? If it is logical that the money that is going to Israel should go to, it's more logical that it go to those most in need in the United States of America, and you would agree that the middle class are not those most in need, logically, based off of pure logic, that middle class are not the most in need of that money in this country. What about the upper middle class? Would it be the upper middle class based off of your logic? Because you're Spock. What do you think about that it's the upper middle class that are most in need of the money? What would you say to that, Spock? And Spock would be like, well, that's obviously illogical. That is illogical. So we've eliminated the middle class being most in need of this $5 billion going to Israel. We've eliminated the upper middle class most in need of this $5 billion going to Israel. So what do we have left? How about the lower middle class, Spock? What would you say? Is that logical? And then Spock would respond logically, because we're talking about logic, deductive logic, pure logic, no, not based in any kind of opinion or just logic. Lower middle class, Spock, what would you say? Well, even though the lower middle class are more in need of than the middle class, unfortunately, there is people that are more in need than the lower middle class. Okay, so what's below the lower middle class, Spock? Can you please tell us what? Okay, that would be the working class. And so, okay, Spock, so then you're saying that it is the working class that is most in need of the $5 billion that is sent to Israel, that based off of logic should go to people most in need in this country as opposed to Israel. So would it be that it is the working class that is most in need in this country, Spock, based off of logic, not opinion and mainstream media taglines and internet influencer taglines, just based pure logic? Spock, is it the working class most in need? And Spock, of course, would be like, well, obviously that's illogical. That's illogical, Captain Kirk. Even though the working class is in need. Spock, are you saying that the working class is not in need of that money? And Spock's like, well, obviously not. I'm not saying that the working class isn't in need of that money. There just are people more in need of that money than the working class. So, Spock, so what you're saying is we've eliminated the upper middle class, the upper class, the upper middle class, the middle class, and the lower middle class, and the working class as those most in need. So you're saying that there is other people more in need of this $5 billion that is going to Israel that would be better going to those most in need in the United States, but none of those factions of groups of people are not most in need. Even though some of them are in need, they're not most in need. Is that what you're saying, Spock? Well, based off of logic, yes. Okay, Spock, so what is this mysterious group of people They almost seem invisible, like nobody even sees them. They're never even talked about. Nobody pays any attention to. Who would this be, this people group that is most in need of that $5 billion that's going to Israel, that would be better off being directed to those most in need in this country? Spock, who could it be? Since it's not the upper class, it's not the upper middle class, it's not the middle class, it's not the lower middle class, it's not the working class. Well, if not those, well, by gosh, Spock, could you please share your logical deduction, pure logical deduction, without political opinion and influence or internet opinion, just based pure logic? Spock, please tell us, who would this be? Well, those most in need obviously would be those lowest on the pyramid scheme they call the United States of America, which would be the poor, underclass, homeless, etc., etc. Those would be the most in need of this $5 billion going to, like, you know, it's like I have to just break this down into first grade, kindergarten level intelligence. Why does everything have to be broken down to this like lowest IQ? Okay, let's make a Star Trek movie about this, because everybody's too stupid to just have a real conversation. Everybody's so fucking stupid and shit in their pants. We can't have a real conversation, so let's do a Star Trek episode about it then, you know. And what would the logical conclusion be, Spock, since you are the logic? You are logic. You are the one, the archetype of logic that we must, in times like this, when we must rely on logic to deduct the most logical answer to such questions as where should $5 billion that is being directed to Israel actually go, who would it be? Well, based off of logic, it would be those most in need in this country, and those most in need in this country are not the middle class, they're not the upper middle class, they're not the lower middle class, they're not the upper class, they're not the master class, they're not the ruling class, they're not even the working class, they're actually the underclass, the lowest on the totem pole, the lowest on the pyramid scheme that they call the United States of America. So if that is the logical conclusion, why isn't anybody even pointing this out? You see, all these people, they're all grieved with this $5 billion being sent to Israel, but none of them have used logic deduction to conclude actually why they have this grievance and where this money actually should go based off of logic. So we have to get Spock on the case here. We got to get someone who actually has logic instead of some stupid fucking internet influencer, some stupid fucking MSM shill, some stupid fucking internet grifter, you know. Let's get logic on the case here. Just pure logic. Let's get the logic on this, you know. But you don't see that anywhere. You don't see it on any media. You don't see it on alt-tech media. You don't see it on new tech media. You don't see it on MSM media. There is no logic. It's all just a bunch of crybabies shitting their fucking pants because they have one of the popular channels. And so they got to show everybody that their diaper is soiled and that they really need, a diaper change and then some cookies and candy and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, hello.